The presentation I'm going to share with you today is to attack somewhat the perception, right or wrong, that I see things coming before they happen. So this deck does have quite a few predictions in it. This deck was created in roughly the 2008 to 2009 timeframe. And at the time, I was an independent consultant doing things in the telecommunications and service provider arena. I was chasing trends, looking for things coming together. And so what I was presenting was this notion of, if you're familiar with 2010, Space Odyssey, the whole idea is that if you're in a service provider role, this is probably where some technology trends would come up. So let's grade ourselves on how we think we did. By we, of course, I mean me. And I'm going to probably have to go to the preview, and I figured it out. So that was me, and that was my old website. I actually put my TripIt on there. Does anyone remember TripIt before it was acquired by Concur and SAP? Okay, anybody? All right, yep. So I told you it's a little microcosm of 2008, 2009. This is in Idaho. And I was trying to make the case that sometimes tranquil waters can be a little bit not. And so this is the other side of it. So if you've been to Shoshone Falls in Idaho, just before Shoshone Falls, it's beautiful, it's tranquil, it's placid. But just on the other side of that, not so much. And this is a core banks rod holder, which basically means you go to the Outer Banks and you forgot my rod holder. Sometimes you have to make do with what you have around you. And so that's driftwood being used as a rod holder. And so if you're someone that's a fan of words and definitions, how can you be and look for these harbingers of things to come? And so, again, like a rear view mirror, it's funny that you gave that example earlier, because this is not how I was driving down the highway looking through the passenger side or driver's side mirror. But you can't rely on hindsight either. And then, just as a quick history lesson, this was still a cool slide to do back then, because it said, hey, look, it's not been that long since 1989. And here we are. I used to drink back then, so this is literally me catching myself on stage with what looks to be about 1 or 2 fingers of scotch before I speak to a telecom professionals organization. But look at what I'm rocking as the mobile device in front of me. Does anyone remember the international edition of the BlackBerry with the little white wheel? Okay, yeah, that you could squirrel on. And of course, microphone, notes, and candy, as one does. So what I talked about was where I had been and what kind of information I had been pulling together to look for trends. And so things like wireless symposiums, or computer and telephony things, or going to IP possibilities for people that were thinking that video was actually going to be delivered not over cable TV, but actually over the internet. I know, salacious. I went to my first Google I/O, or was getting ready to. I was really into microtik routers at the time. And then I had just gotten an ability to go to TechCrunch 50, what's now called Disrupt. And the list, I just was constantly in motion looking for trends. And so I wanted to see some patterns. And so these are the patterns I thought were really interesting from the experts. They said things like IPTV was going to be the next big thing. Mobile TV, people are going to watch TV on their phones. Fiber to the prem, meaning that you would have fiber optics in your house. It would just happen. Voice over IP was going to be awesome, because then you could just do your voice over an IP network. WiMAX. Does anyone remember WiMAX? Okay. How about peer-to-peer file transfer as basically like the way, okay. IMS, enum, FMC, and IPv6. We are still literally waiting for IPv6, and it's 2024, okay? But these were other experts. So what I was thinking was, if you go back in time, do you remember when it was $30 to do in-flight Wi-Fi, and it was absolutely awful, okay? And that was for just one flight. Now, what happens is if you look forward, today, interesting that GoGo for a full flight was $7.95, right? And that was the original GoGo, okay? So now if we look at things like portability, there's literally a hardware crowd supply, kind of crowd-funded thing to bring back what looked like netbooks, but actually fully functional little tiny laptops. So even now, this many years later, people are still chasing after this perfect form factor for people that, and I know we were talking earlier about like how you can't type on the keyboard is just too wrong to type on something that small, but cloud-based storage, that's where everything was going. And then I don't know if you guys have femto or pico cells in your house if you're in a rural area where you don't quite have enough signal, but this was just starting to happen back then. So like if you had one of these, like, wow, you have 5 bars of, wow, no one even knew what 5 bars was, but if you had one of these, you know what 5 bars was. And then there were companies like Clear, which were also, if you remember WiMAX and all this kind of stuff. So Clear was trying to get into this space, and so no one remembers Clear anymore. So a lot of the brands just don't even exist. People doing charging for long distance. People still paid long distance bills back then, but Skype was changing that assumption. And then I don't know if you've ever been to other establishments that like Wi-Fi was a really big deal. And so this was one of the first places where you could actually get Wi-Fi. And the joke, of course, because they serve wings that are probably not good for your heart, I figured eventually maybe they'll start including Lipitor in the formulation of the sauces. So you could get your wings with Lipitor. But that hasn't happened either, so I was wrong. And then this is things like cell on wheels. These are cows. These are abilities to manifest mobile infrastructure and support when needed. And primarily this was for events. Like for football games, we just rolled them out. Like we had them everywhere. And yet we've just had like major calamities from hurricanes throughout the nation. And we just don't apparently have enough of these. So is it really important for football games, but not so important in the wake of like a major disaster in the year 2024? So interesting. This is if you've ever gone in a flight and seen the circles when you look down on the farmland, those are called pivot farms. It's a central arm anchored, water and fertilizer and whatnot comes out of them. There was a drought back in this time frame in the Southeast. And so there's a massive amount of funding on things like machine learning, applied machine learning for agricultural systems that would control like the arms on a hard drive seeking the dry spots to only irrigate the dry spots and not just everything else that doesn't need it because there wasn't a lot of water to go around. Of course, the drought went away and then everyone conveniently forgot all that stuff and we all kind of moved on. But it was a big deal back then. Now, in terms of the predictions, which is where I hope everyone here can appreciate how I need to be savaged. The great Carnac, myself, said that content delivery networks will be a big deal. Fiber tails will be a big deal. Multi-RF devices will be a very big deal. Cloud, this whole concept of cloud probably is going to go somewhere. Affinity models, I'll get into in a second. Social constructs, I was really big on this thing. Next generation voice, session controls, virtual routers, and impulse enablement. Again, this is 2008, 2009. So this is what I thought the CDN market was going to, these are some of the logos. I was like, you're going to probably, I don't know what Boxy or Zillion TV, I don't know where they went. Voodoo technically is still, I guess, an icon you can get in some of the app stores on TVs. You probably recognize Xbox, the first Apple TV. Netflix was still shipping actual, okay. So a lot of these things are just kind of turning the curve, but eventually everything will be kind of delivered from these edges. And so you see things like Acme, Limelight, Amazon, S3, YouTube. But what I was really anchoring this on was like set-top boxes, the over-the-top movement. So I don't know how I want to grade myself on this, but it was sort of a glimmer. But it seems like most people do tend to watch things, over a content delivery network of some kind. This one, depending on where you live, I was either completely off or way too aggressive. The interesting thing in that little photo kick video, which doesn't even exist anymore, like a YouTube basically, that is a single hand splicer for doing fiber optic polish and in connections when you're going to do something to connect a house. So it used to, you'd have to pull this into a truck, got to be over a microscope, polishing ends, dressing and fitting. This was a little robot that was, something go much faster. And the thought was like everyone's just going to have fiber at their house and you just own it, just like in Europe. And we're in the US, so actually didn't happen. Multi-RF device. My theory was like every possible radio that could fit on the, the base, board inside of a phone, it would just do all of it. And, some of this came true, but, how fast, right? Yeah. And then everyone was making fun of Balmer back then, and I do still believe that Satella, really does benefit from some of the early bets that Balmer did make. his thing was the 3 screens in a cloud. I'm not sure if you remember that or not, but they thought they were going to own mobile devices, Microsoft. He was still making fun of iPhones. $500 for a phone, you know, something. Okay. So, but I thought like Apple would probably win with iTunes. And I thought .me would be, you know, like the next big social network, but neither here nor there. I was still wrapped around the axle on things like App Engine and Bigtable. Bigtable still very much, and you know, App Engine is arguably like what we all take. If you say like, okay, that was functions as a service or things like that. But anyway, the whole idea was these service providers should figure out how to work with these guys, not try to recreate the wheel. And then on the affinity model, boy, oh boy, the ability to just log in somewhere using like a common set of credentials. This was called the NASCAR problem. When you used to try to log into things in 2009, 2008, there was like everyone was trying to make their login the default login for everything. So you had like 8 different things to choose from on some of these new social networks. Eventually, of course, it's just become Google, Facebook, maybe Microsoft, right? Or you use your own email and password like a Neanderthal. But the whole idea was that these service providers should open their authentication to take advantage of these networks. Then there's some really oldies but goodies in here. XMPP, PubSub, Hubbub, RSS clouds, fire hoses. So the whole idea was that everything was going to become much, much easier to communicate cross-federation. This was mostly warfare, so I don't think I got much of this right, actually. I mean, the parts were there, but, you know, duh. And Google Wave is arguably your Google Docs experience today. So the notion of like wavelet transformations or blips where you're passing back those events for real-time editings. So, you know, and then this one I thought like Twilio would probably be a big deal, which is the little, you know, logo in the bottom there with no name. So I thought Twilio would be a big deal, but I also said Skype might be a big deal, Google Voice might be a big deal, and Voxio, which I'm not sure who acquired them. But I still put like ones like Yext in there because I said, you know what, someone's going to take all that stuff and transcribe it and, you know, use, you know, audio to text and maybe do something with that one day, which is part of the win strategy for most unstructured data systems today for AI and machine learning. And then session border control was, and session control overall was a big thing because back then you would only come into the network because you got onto the network because of the Wi-Fi. Someone gave you the password. To get past that, it was like the password just stayed with you. And so to this day, we still typically rely on like someone giving you the Wi-Fi password to get onto networks. So I thought this would be, someone would make a huge mint just simplifying how you get onto the network and you'd get a micro payment of some kind. I was just way off. And some of these other companies like Front Porch and Advantage, a lot of these were acquired by companies like Oracle, who basically owns most pieces of what was rural or legacy telecom systems because they bought something that was ultimately you know, tied together with Tekelec, which was all of the SS7 and other underpinnings of telecom. But this was basically like they would make money off of tracking what your DNS traffic was and infer what you were looking at. So not everything was SSL back then, and DNS lookups, they're still going to see what you're looking up mostly over DNS. Anyway, and then vRouters. I was really excited about this, and some of this, you know, became true, but it wasn't tied to like MikroTik. You know, what I didn't see was the liberation of the Linux network stack to be solving cloud problems. But the whole idea that like everything would be SLA, you get your money back if something didn't perform, was a big part of it. And then impulse enablement. So how you could just remove all friction from every type of, you know, transaction, how you would simplify all those steps and elements and pieces. So some of this sort of happened in parts of cloud, possibly, but friends don't let friends bridge networks. That was a very popular shirt back there in that dame. So what I told them was an aggressive, like, here's what you should be doing in the next 30, 180, and, you know, chop up your time and what should be focused on. And so this was just kind of grading like what I thought was ready and what you would just kind of like kick the tires on. So anyway, just an interesting little vignette, but and I said, this is probably what your team is going to look like at scale. So you have all of these pieces and parts for you to be a successful service provider. And a lot of organizations I did work with ended up sort of looking somewhat like this, but not necessarily. But anywho, I just thought this was an interesting encapsulation of what things were like back in the years 2008 and 2009.